On the day my brother ran away from home in a fit of anger, I braved the heavy rain to search for him. Unexpectedly, I was struck by a fallen electrical wire, resulting in the permanent loss of both my arms. From then on, I, who had dreamed of becoming a doctor when I grew up, became a lifelong patient in the hospital. I attempted suicide many times, but each time my family rescued me from the brink of death. My brother knelt before me, pleading, "It's my fault, brother is sorry. Brother begs you, don't die, okay?" My mother quit her job and watched over me day and night, "You are my life. If you die, what will I do?" My father worked desperately overtime, even transferring far abroad, to earn more money for my rehabilitation. I thought life would gradually improve. However, when I finally learned to use my feet in place of hands for daily living, I inadvertently overheard their conversation. If only we had known, it would have been better to let her die back then. That evening, I climbed to the rooftop alone. The wind was strong, I sniffled but did not cry. "Yara! Don't move." My mother rushed over and pulled me back from the edge of the rooftop with all her strength. The force was too great, and we both fell to the ground. Before I could get up, she raised her hand, and a crisp slap landed on my face. "Are you insane? Do you want to force your mother to death?" My ears buzzed, and my cheek burned with pain. In the next second, my mother pulled me into her arms and held me tightly. "If you dare jump, Mom will die with you." Scalding tears fell onto my neck. My brother panted heavily beside us. He had run too hastily and nearly fell. Seeing me safe, his knees weakened, and he almost knelt down. I muffled into my mother's shoulder. "I didn't want to die, really. I just came up to get some fresh air." My mother stiffened, but her arms tightened around me. After a while, my brother turned around, his back slightly hunched. "Let's go, head home." After descending, I turned on the faucet to rinse my feet as usual and sat at the dining table. The food had been reheated multiple times and looked wilted. I lowered my head, using my toes to pick up the spoon, feeding myself bite by bite. My mother sat opposite me, her eyes red and swollen. My brother poked at his rice with chopsticks but ate not a single grain. "Yara, tomorrow my girlfriend is coming over to discuss engagement matters." I paused, then nodded, "Okay. I have plans with friends tomorrow, so I won't be back for dinner." My brother lowered his head and shoveled a large mouthful of rice. We all knew. Since my illness, I went nowhere except the hospital, and I had lost contact with all my former acquaintances. Where would I have friends? That night, my mother filled the bathtub for me as usual. I stood at the door, watching her bend down to test the water temperature. "Mom, can I grow my hair long?" She slowly straightened up and turned to look at me. Why the sudden desire to grow long hair? I looked at myself in the mirror. Long hair can cover a bit. Others won't easily notice that I have no arms. The towel in my mother's hand fell into the bathtub. After a long while, she bent down to pick it up and rinsed it repeatedly under the faucet. The rushing water drowned out her suppressed sobs. With her back to me, her voice thick with nasal congestion, "Grow it, my good baby. Growing long hair will surely be the prettiest." The next morning, I was awakened by the doorbell. It wasn't even 8 o'clock, my mother opened the door in a flurry. "Coming." A crisp female voice rang out, "Hello, Auntie. Sorry for coming early, I have the day off today and thought I'd come help sooner. My parents will arrive a bit later." I sat up and pushed open the bedroom door with my foot. In the living room, a girl stood beside my brother. She had long hair cascading over her shoulders and held exquisite gifts in her hands. She was smiling and talking with my mother. Hearing the noise, she turned her head, her gaze landing on my shoulders. I turned to hide back in the room. Lena, however, walked toward me with a smile. "You must be Yara. I often hear your brother mention you, finally meeting you today." She took out a light gray scarf from the paper bag and gently draped it over my shoulders. "This is a scarf I saw on a business trip. It's cashmere, very soft. Your skin is fair, this color suits you." The scarf carried a faint fragrance. I stiffened in place, my toes unconsciously curling. "Thank you, sister," My brother and mother stood aside, their expressions tense. I lowered my head, wanting to retreat. Sorry, I have plans today, so I won't be home for dinner. Lena's hand gently rested on my shoulder. I've come several times and missed you each time. Today, no matter what, I have to talk more with you. She asked with a beaming smile. Ethan, isn't that right? My brother looked at me. Yara, how about rescheduling your plans? I softly hummed in agreement. By the time I finished washing up and sat on the sofa, Lena had tied on my mother's apron and was helping in the kitchen. Her movements were efficient, chatting with my mother as she worked, and my mother smiled. Lena placed the fruit platter on the coffee table and sat beside me. Yara, your eyes are so beautiful, you should smile more. I tugged at the corners of my mouth, unsure how to respond. Lena's parents arrived. Uncle and Auntie were dressed appropriately and spoke politely. The gifts they brought piled up in one corner of the coffee table. When lunch was served, I stood up. I'll eat in my room, you all. Lena pulled me back, moving the chair closer to her. Sit next to me. My mother opened her mouth, my brother hesitated. In the end, I sat down. Initially, everyone chatted about the weather and preliminary wedding plans. Lena served me food naturally, as if we had known each other for a long time. Until I skillfully picked up the soup spoon with my toes. The smiles on Lena's parents' faces vanished. They set down their chopsticks and exchanged a glance. Only Lena's voice remained at the table. After the meal, Uncle took a sip of tea. Ethan is a good child, we have no demands on the dowry, as long as you live well. He paused, his gaze slowly sweeping in my direction. But there is one condition. After marriage, your small family should focus on yourselves. Your sister has parents to care for her, you can't prioritize her in everything anymore. My brother's back straightened abruptly. Uncle, Yara is my sister. I will never abandon her in this lifetime. Uncle raised his hand to interrupt, but you're starting a family, you can't care for her forever. I can. You can't. Unless you don't want to marry my daughter. The air tensed suddenly. It's possible. Everyone looked at me. I stared at my empty sleeves and repeated, brother can do it. Lena stood up abruptly. Dad. What are you saying? I won't agree. From now on, Yara is my sister too. Uncle's voice rose sharply. What about you? How will you live your days? Always behind her? Uncle grabbed her wrist. Come with me, go home. Lena was half-dragged by her parents toward the door. She looked back, tears rolling down. My brother took out a cigarette pack and went to the balcony. The lighter clicked several times before igniting. I watched him through the glass door. He hunched his back, smoke rising in puffs, dispersed by the wind. At that moment, looking at my dangling sleeves, a wave of nausea surged in my stomach. Suddenly, I deeply hated myself. In the middle of the night, I was awakened by sounds in the living room. I walked out barefoot. My brother was bending to put on shoes, moving urgently. Brother, where are you going? He paused. Lena sneaked out and just called me, saying she's at People's Park. I'm going to pick her up now. I was stunned for a moment, then nodded. It's cold outside, wear more. He stood up and looked at me. Go back to sleep. I smiled slightly. I'll open the door for you. Wait for you to bring sister back. My brother smiled too, rubbing my hair. Okay. The door closed gently. The streetlights extinguished one by one, dawn broke. My brother hadn't returned. When my mother got up, she was startled to see me curled on the sofa. Yara? Why are you sleeping here? Brother went to pick up sister and hasn't returned. My mother dialed the phone, it rang for a long time before connecting. As she listened, her face gradually turned pale. Which hospital? We're coming right away. My mother turned to me, her lips trembling. Lena was hit by a car. The lights outside the emergency room were blindingly white. When we arrived, we saw my brother leaning against the wall from afar. His clothes were dusty, and there was a bruise on his forehead. The uncle who was refined yesterday now had bloodshot eyes, gripping my brother's collar tightly. It's all you. All because of you, you bastard. If not for you, how would my daughter run out at midnight? How would she have a car accident? My mother stumbled over, bowing repeatedly, sorry, really sorry. Her voice trembled, tears streaming down her face. It's our fault, we didn't teach our child well. Uncle flung my brother away, pointing at my mother's nose. Get out. Take your son and this cripple, get out. Never appear before us again. If Lena has any mishap, I'm not done with you. We stood there for a long time. Until the emergency room door opened. The doctor came out, removing his mask. The patient is temporarily out of danger but still needs observation. Uncle and Auntie immediately surrounded him. My brother took half a step forward, then stopped. My mother pulled his arm. Let's go, head home first. On the way back, the car was silent. My brother gripped the steering wheel tightly, knuckles white. I sat in the back, watching the back of his head. In one moment, I saw him quickly raise his hand and wipe his eyes. Back home, I returned to my bedroom. After an unknown time, suppressed sobs came. Mom, it's me. I harmed Lena. If she really has something. Why didn't I agree yesterday? Why didn't I agree? His cries grew louder. Then, I heard his hoarse voice. If I had known, I wouldn't have stopped her from dying back then. A loud slap sounded. Then came my mother's collapsed wails. I leaned against the door, slowly sliding to the ground. Tears surged silently, flowing down my cheeks, into my neck, and seeping into my collar. The next afternoon, the phone rang. I took deep breaths and slid to answer with my toes. My father's face appeared on the screen. The background was a crude shack, the sky overcast. He had lost much weight and darkened. Yara, have you eaten? How have you been lately? Do your arms still hurt? I forced a smile, my voice as light as possible. Yes, I'm fine. Dad, you've lost weight and darkened. He waved his hand. Dad's fine, Dad's sturdy. The project here is almost done. Once paid, Dad will go back and find the best physiotherapist for you. At that moment, someone off camera shouted his name, urging him to work. Dad, go busy yourself. I'm really fine. Take care of yourself outside, don't get sick, eat well, dress warmly. I rambled on. My father smiled. Dad's going to work, listen to Mom at home. I set down the phone and rubbed my cheek with my knee. It was damp. The house was quiet. My mother and brother had gone to the hospital early. On the living room table, food was covered for me. I sat down, eating bite by bite, very slowly. I cherished every grain of rice and leaf of vegetable, finishing them. Then, I returned to my room, opening the wardrobe with my foot. In the back hung a light blue dress with exquisite embroidery on the chest. That was the gift my brother gave me with his first salary. He said, "Our Yara wearing this will surely look like a little princess." That was so long ago. I spent much more time than usual, clumsily putting it on with my feet and teeth. The zipper was at the back, I couldn't reach it, so it remained open. Sitting before the mirror, I looked at myself. The dress hung loosely because the zipper wasn't closed, the sleeves dangling empty. Suddenly, I wanted to hear my mother's voice. I picked up the phone and dialed her number with my foot. It rang for a long time with no answer. Trying again yielded the same. I called my brother next. It was quickly hung up. Seconds later, a message popped in with 3 words, "I'm annoyed." I stared at those words for a long time. Then, I typed a reply, "Sorry." I slipped on the softest pair of cloth shoes and left home. At the farthest end of the neighborhood stood a building tucked away in a secluded spot. I skipped the elevator and climbed the stairs. It leaned against the wall, below was a green belt rarely walked, planted with half-dead shrubs. I climbed to its rooftop, the 18th floor. The rooftop wind was as strong as ever. I walked to the edge, sat down with feet dangling. This way, I wouldn't hit anyone. I took out a painkiller from the dress pocket, tore the foil with my teeth, and swallowed it. I feared pain and failing to die in one fall, that would be too embarrassing. Then, I gently leaned forward. Wind rushed fiercely upward, filling my ears with howling. My mother and brother returned in the evening. As the car turned into the complex, they saw a dense crowd in the distance. An ominous premonition flashed in their hearts. My mother pushed open the car door, her legs weakening, nearly kneeling. My brother supported her, they stumbled running over. They forced their way to the front. On a cleared patch of ground, a dirty plastic sheet covered something. The edge revealed a bit of light blue fabric and a strand of black hair. My mother madly pushed aside all barriers and lifted the plastic sheet. For some reason, my consciousness did not dissipate, floating like a ghost beside them. I wanted to stop my mother's action but futilely passed through their bodies. My corpse was cruelly exposed to everyone. The light blue dress was covered in dust and bloodstains. Hair scattered, covering most of the face, revealing only a pale chin and neck. Surrounding discussions arose. Someone shouted, "Call an ambulance quick." The person beside pulled him, shaking head, "She's long gone. How could this girl be so desperate? Heard it's this family's youngest daughter, with disabled arms." My mother maintained the bent posture of lifting, motionless. Her eyes fixed on my lifeless body on the ground. Then, as if her bones were extracted, she softly fell backward. My brother stood behind her, his face drained of color. He stepped forward to support her. My mother leaned in his arms, head weakly tilting back, gaze scattered without focus. Her chest heaved violently, only exhaling, not inhaling. My brother shouted in fear, "Mom! Don't scare me. You saw wrong, this isn't Yara. Yara is waiting at home." He seemed to say to Mom, also convincing himself. Then his voice lowered, logic increasingly chaotic. He lowered his head, burying his face in my mother's shoulder, shoulders uncontrollably shuddering. My mother suddenly pushed him away and pounced toward the ground again. This time, with trembling hands, she brushed aside the hair covering my cheek. My head was flattened in one spot, dark red blood around the mouth. My mother cradled my face, fingers stroking my cheek, large tears rolling down, smashing onto my forehead. "Yara, ah. Look at Mom, Mom is here. Mom was wrong, Mom shouldn't have left you alone at home. Mom can't live without you. My daughter, ah." She cried out while kowtowing, praying to heaven to revive me. She pulled my cold, stiff body forcefully into her embrace, as if this could stuff the lost life back into my body. My brother squatted down, reaching to pick up the old cloth shoe fallen in the nearby bushes. Then, clutching my shoe, he cried heart-wrenchingly. He used all his strength to slap himself repeatedly. "It's me. I killed you. Yara, brother is sorry for life. Come back. Come back and let me die instead." I watched helplessly, wanting to wipe their tears but unable. Police and funeral home staff stepped forward, trying to pull the collapsed mother and brother away from my corpse. My mother held me tightly, it took several people to drag her away. She struggled, crying out like a mother beast losing her cub. My body was carefully gathered. Some parts stuck to the ground, requiring professional tools to shovel up. A young staff member turned away, unable to hold back dry heaves. I floated nearby, watching all this. Shame weighed on my soul, nearly unable to lift my head. I bowed repeatedly to those handling such a horrific scene for me. Sorry, if I had known it would trouble others so much, I should have chosen a cleaner way to leave. Sorry for the inconvenience. Ultimately, I was placed in a dark body bag, then into a cardboard box temporarily as a coffin. When the funeral home staff asked if to send directly for cremation, the limp mother suddenly pounced, protecting the box with her whole body. "Don't touch her. No one touches my daughter," she roared, her gaze making even death-accustomed staff subconsciously step back. She hugged the box tightly, as if it were the world's only treasure. I sighed, gently pressing my forehead to my mother's face. This was how she used to comfort me. My brother staggered over, bowing deeply to the staff. "Sorry, give us some time." He repeated sorry over and over, unsure if to the staff or to me in the box. Ultimately, they were allowed to take me home temporarily. My brother signed a pile of documents with trembling hands. My mother held the box throughout, refusing to let go. For my father's safety, they used the excuse of my brother's marriage to call him home. On the phone, my father's voice was full of surprise and relief. "You brat, finally settled. Good, good, the project here is wrapping up, I'll take leave and book a ticket right away." On pickup day, only my brother went to the airport. My father emerged dragging a huge suitcase, travel-worn but smiling. He looked around. "Eh? Just you? Where's your mom? Yara?" "This girl," I said. "Dad's back today, and she doesn't come pick me up." He patted my brother's shoulder, joking, "Is there a surprise prepared at home for me?" My brother's lips moved, pulling a smile uglier than crying. "Yara is waiting at home." Perhaps the joy of returning and travel fatigue masked the details. My father noticed no anomaly. Along the way, he eagerly rummaged the suitcase. "Brought gifts for Yara, she'll love them. Health supplements your mom mentioned too." "Right." I searched long and found a particularly exquisite toy doctor set, stethoscope, white coat, small medicine box, very realistic. "Our Yara wanted to be a doctor since young," he said, voice full of affection and a subtle sorrow. My brother drove silently, gripping the wheel tightly. While Dad rummaged, he quickly raised his hand, forcefully wiping tears. The car entered the familiar complex. My father's words lessened. Perhaps he finally felt the suffocating heaviness in the car. His smile faded bit by bit, eyes showing unease. "Ethan, did something happen at home? Is Yara unwell again?" My brother didn't answer, just parked quietly. My father's heart sank. He dragged the luggage, footsteps hesitant behind my brother. My brother took out keys, hands shaking badly, aligning the lock after several tries. The door opened. A dim lamp lit the living room corner. In the center stood an ice coffin covered with a cloth. My father's face drained of color instantly. The bag with the doctor toy set dropped straight to the ground. The plastic stethoscope rolled out, bouncing to the ice coffin's side. My father seemed punched hard in the face. His body swayed sharply, leaning on the doorframe to stand. His gaze fixed on the central ice coffin. My mother's eyes were swollen to slits, face with dried tear marks. Seeing Dad, her lips trembled violently. "Why are you back so late? Do you know our daughter is dead? She's gone. We have no daughter." "Ah." She pounced on Dad, grabbing his collar, wailing as if crying out her heart and lungs. My father's eyes widened hugely, eyeballs instantly covered in terrifying red veins. He opened his mouth, looking at his crying wife, then sharply turned to the ice coffin. "Ethan, tell me, who's inside?" My brother knelt with a thud, forehead banging the floor. He didn't answer, just pounded his head crazily with fists, tears replacing all words. The answer needed no saying. The last color on my father's face vanished, turning paper white. He raised his hand sharply, clutching his left chest tightly, body sliding uncontrollably down the doorframe. "Robert!" My mother screamed in terror. "What's wrong? Don't scare me." My father couldn't speak, lips cyanotic, forehead beading large cold sweat, whole body curling in pain. My mother panicked, fumbling to pinch his philtrum, shrieking at brother, "Quick, call 911. Your dad's not okay." I anxiously spun around them. I wanted to support Dad, press his chest, but passed through his body repeatedly. I looked at Dad's pained, twisted face, the glaring white hair at his temples unknown when appeared, the deep knife-like wrinkles on his face. These were marks from laboring for me, rushing for this family. "Dad! Dad!" I cried, shouting him, pressing my ear tightly to his heaving chest, trying to hear his heartbeat. "Dad, don't scare me. Wake up, look at me. I'm here, sorry Dad. It's my fault, I was wrong, I'm not a good daughter. I always drag you down, always worry you, please don't have issues." 911 came and went. Initial diagnosis was angina and temporary shock from excessive grief. Needed rest and observation, avoid further stimulation. But in this home, stimulation was everywhere. My father refused hospital, leaning on the sofa, eyes blankly staring at the ceiling. Then, he tried standing, but legs too weak to support. He pushed away my mother's supporting hand. Actually used hands to prop ground, inch by inch, crawling toward the ice coffin. My mother wanted to pull him, but brother held her tightly. My brother shook head desperately at Mom, tears streaming. He knew Dad must see my last face, no one could stop it. Finally, Dad crawled to the ice coffin. With trembling hand, he grabbed the cover and yanked. In the ice coffin, I lay quietly after simple cleanup and arrangement by funeral staff. They changed me into clean clothes, makeup on face. My arms' empty sleeves were carefully folded, placed at sides. Ah! Dad erupted a heart-rending howl. He lay on the ice coffin's edge, extending hand to touch my face. But fingertips couldn't land. Yara. Dad's back to see you, look at Dad. Ah. He pressed his head on the cold glass, hot tears smashing down, blurring my face. It's Dad's fault, Dad shouldn't have left. He rambled incoherently, fists starting to pound his chest. Dad's useless, can't earn money to save you. Dad didn't even see your last face. Dad deserves death. Ah. Mom and brother watched aside, crying in a heap. Mom wanted to pull Dad, but he shook her off. Brother knelt at the coffin's other side, watching Dad's life-unwilling pain. And I floating aside, already tears streaming. I watched him lie on the glass, crying despairingly like a child. I knelt beside him, futilely trying to hug. Dad, please don't hit. It's all my fault, I shouldn't be so selfish, shouldn't only think of my own release. Sorry, next life I'll be a healthy child to filial you well, never make you so sad again. This once warm home was firmly trapped in this cold night. Outside the window, night black as ink, no stars. 3 days later was my burial day. The sky was overcast, drizzling fine rain, as if the sky cried dry tears. Relatives and friends came, mostly Mom's relatives and Dad's old colleagues. They wore black, solemn expressions, conversing lowly. Mom looked haggard, as if aged 20 years overnight. Dad's hair whitened overnight, staring blankly at the tombstone. The funeral process was oppressive and long. Mom relied on Dad to stand throughout. Her eyes could cry no more tears, just red swollen blankly gazing ahead. Dad held her tightly, back very straight. But closely, his hand on Mom's shoulder trembled uncontrollably. Lena's father came too. No umbrella, letting drizzle wet his shoulders. He held a plain wreath of white chrysanthemums and lilies, walking heavily. Uncle walked straight to brother. Brother stiffened seeing him, lowered head, hands clenched at sides. Uncle placed the wreath gently at my grave, then turned to brother. Lena woke up. Brother lifted head sharply, a glint in eyes. How is she? Recovering well? Uncle paused, gazing complexly at brother. Body's fine, but she doesn't remember you. Doctor says selective amnesia from impact, or perhaps psychologically unbearable. His voice lowered, with fatigue. She doesn't remember why she ran out that night, doesn't remember the accident, nor you. Brother's face paled completely, lips moving but no sound. This way, it's good. At least I don't fear her ending like your sister. Uncle shifted gaze, looking at my parents supporting each other afar. Then at the coffin about to be buried, tone heavy. I heard about Yara, I'm very sad too. Ethan, the past, let it pass. You must stand like a real man, hold up this family. Your parents have only you left, take good care. Don't make the living more pained. Finished, he glanced last at my tombstone, nodded to brother, heavily patted his shoulder. Turned, through drizzle and crowd, to the coming car. Brother stood in place, letting rain and tears mix and slide. He raised hand, fiercely wiped face, deep breath. Then, turned, straightening his slightly hunched back. Walked back to consoling relatives, continuing those trivial necessary interactions. His face expressionless, actions unusually firm. The ceremony proceeded orderly. Mourning music low, speeches brief and heavy. When the coffin slowly lowered into the grave, Mom emitted a suppressed wail. Her body softened down, tightly supported by Dad and nearby relatives. Dad closed eyes tightly, jawline tense, dead. Finally, the burning of relics. Besides some old clothes of mine. Dad with trembling hand placed the complete toy doctor set into the burning basin. Flames leaped, quickly devouring the plastic and fabric. Mom gazed at flames, murmuring, "Yara, take this, next life must be a healthy doctor." Dad, Mom. Brother stepped forward, knelt beside parents, swearing to flames and tombstone, "Rest assured, I'll care for this family. Yara, you're watching from heaven, rest assured, brother won't let parents suffer again." His voice not loud, yet unusually firm, penetrating fine rain and burning crackles. Dad finally opened eyes, looking at roaring flames. Then at my smiling old photo on tombstone, then at his suddenly matured son beside, and wife clinging tightly. He slowly nodded. Flames gradually extinguished, leaving ashes. They were quickly wetted by rain, merging into muddy new soil. Relatives began dispersing. Rain gradually stopped, clouds letting through skylight. Dad and Mom supported each other, brother walking behind. The three last glanced at my tombstone, then step by step towards cemetery exit. Their backs in the empty cemetery seemed especially small, yet especially close. Like three trees ravaged by storm, roots tightly entwined. I floated above tombstone, watching their receding backs. The taut string in my heart suddenly loosened. The obsessions entangling me, regrets for life, debts to family, hatred of my situation, seemed to drift away with that wisp of smoke, slowly dispersing in the post-rain air. A breeze blew through the cemetery, brushing grass, bringing moist soil scent. My consciousness finally felt long-lost lightness. That bound by invisible ropes feeling vanished. I watched Dad, Mom, and brother's figures disappear at cemetery corner. Finally, toward their leaving direction, I softly said, "Goodbye. Life is too bitter, next life I don't want to come again." Then, my long-drifting consciousness dissipated in the wind. From afar, on some tree, came a crisp bird call. The sky seemed really about to clear.